Warning, this video contains spoilers for the ending of Final Fantasy VII Remake and the Zelda Timeline split found in the ending of Ocarina of Time. I'll give you 7 seconds to click off this video before we'll be diving deep into both.
Nice. Very nice.
The ending chapters of Final Fantasy VII Remake sent shockwaves across the gaming community, as it turned out that we almost got a one-to-one recreation of Final Fantasy VII, but just for its introduction, that is Midgar. Well, actually 80 to 85%, as the overarching theme of Destiny and defying it in this remake was introduced right after the bombing mission in Chapter 2. That is to say, when Aerith, surrounded by something, caught Cloud's attention, and Aerith, terrified, grabbed Cloud out of desperation, revealing the ghosts that Red 13 late in the game explained to be the Whispers, or more precisely the Arbiters of Fate. Or if you prefer, the uber purist of the Final Fantasy VII community who wanted to force the aging original development team to spend the next decade or more recreating 1997's Final Fantasy VII frame by frame but in 4K. Because that is kind of how this feels. Still, the origin and nature of the Arbiters is not tied to the fans in-game, but rather to the planet using the Whispers as a desperate defense to prevent time-traveling post-Advent children Sephiroth from altering the events of Final Fantasy VII and thus getting the chance to create a new timeline split, and a reality where he can win. All throughout Final Fantasy VII Remake, we see the Arbiters doing the utmost to assure that the original events from Final Fantasy VII take place, and interfere whenever deviations from the flow of Destiny are about to unfold. Deviations that were initiated by future Sephiroth's arrival back to the past to throw Cloud off the original path and thus preventing Avalanche's victorious journey. Doesn't this travel from the future of one timeline to the past to create another timeline sound kind of familiar? It does, as it is the exact same plot device used in the ending of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, when the hero of time is sent from the future of the adult timeline to the past to change the past and create a new future, the child timeline. The concept is the same in Final Fantasy VII Remake, only instead of the hero time traveling and altering events to create a new future, we have the main villain doing it. Planet, and in fact Aerith, know that the existential threat of Sephiroth from the future has come back to the past with his knowledge of the future. Knowledge that he aims to utilize to screw up Cloud's quest. Throughout the game, Sephiroth attempts time and time again to throw off Cloud, until he realizes that things are going to stay on the same path as long as the planet intervenes with the Whispers. These, however, are not in the slightest subtle, and combined with the glimpses into the tragic future that awaits, over time become despised by the entirety of Avalanche, and especially by the moment we reach the edge of Midgar. The planet went simply a little bit too far in its interventions and warnings in order to keep things on track, and in the process scared Cloud's party enough to fall straight into the villain's trap. And as such, the planet loses everything in the last chapter of the game. In the final chapter of the game, we are invited by Sephiroth, or if you prefer, the developers, to defy the destiny that are the exact events of the rest of the original Final Fantasy VII, specifically through the Harbinger of Fate. Anyhow, destroying this obstacle has broken the forced destiny of all timelines, ending up as one and the same, namely the one we play in the original Final Fantasy VII. With it, alternate timelines have been created, and in many ways, Final Fantasy VII has gotten a massive timeline split. The highlights of which are that there are now 2 outcomes to Zack Fair's final stand in Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core.
Boy, oh boy. The price of freedom is steep. Embrace your dreams. And, whatever happens, protect your honor. As soldier! Come and get it!
When we think about it, it is actually very similar to the one found in the Hero of Time's 2 outcomes in the final battle of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, only in reversed order and with emphasis on a bag of chips, with the Shinra Republic safety propaganda mascot stamp being different from the one we see throughout the so far playable remake timeline. Since in Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, with its original Final Fantasy VII and remake timeline branches, Zack Fair was killed on his way back to Aerith, while in Ocarina of Time, we win as the hero of time and prevent the downfall timeline that takes place if you fall against Ganondorf. In this regard, have you noticed one thing? The bad timeline for both Final Fantasy VII and Legend of Zelda is the original timeline of the oldest games in each franchise. 1997's Final Fantasy VII, and in the case of Zelda, 1991's A Link to the Past, 1986's Legend of Zelda, and 1987's Zelda 2. In fact, there are more similarities, as in Final Fantasy VII there are now more parallel universes within each of Zack's outcomes. In his Downfall timeline we already have Final Fantasy VII and now the remake, meaning that we already have at least 3 different timeline branches confirmed, though slightly different from Zelda's, as the split differentiating from the original Final Fantasy VII takes place a few months after the 2 outcomes of Zack Fair's battle. While in Ocarina of Time, the hero of time is almost immediately sent back to the past as a child to change the future and thus create another child timeline branch separate from the one he shaped in his adult timeline. The change in the timeline in Final Fantasy VII is also not the result of a time-traveling hero, but more likely a time-traveling villain, namely Sephiroth. In the original Final Fantasy VII, things happened because of Avalanche, and it went this way until Sephiroth's defeat. In the case of the remake's timeline, Sephiroth, by forcing the intervention of the planet through the Whispers, puts us on the path that ultimately results in breaking free from the flow of time and the one-bound timeline to creating multiple different timeline branches, or alternatives. First split appears with Zack Fair's stand against the Shinra army, where he originally falls, but after beating the Whispers and the Harbinger, there's an outcome where Zack Fair doesn't fall, in a new created parallel universe. At the same time, the second split from the original timeline has already occurred as a result of defeating the Whispers. In other words, the new Final Fantasy VII timeline and the official Zelda timeline have actually become very similar in terms of the structure of their timelines. Both timelines are linear until they split based on the outcome of a crucial character after Sephiroth and Cloud and Ganondorf and the Hero of Time meddle with the established fate. One thing that is important to keep in mind in regards to all of this is who is the real catalyst behind this. The main villain of each franchise, Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII and Ganondorf on the Demise's hatred in the Legend of Zelda franchise. You may have noticed it already, but in the Legend of Zelda it isn't Ganondorf who alters the past, but rather his adversary, the Hero of Time, who is sent back to fix the bad future by exposing Ganondorf and to relive his childhood. The similarities of failure leading to a will to prevent a bad outcome for the said individual are striking, but the motivations to do so are different. The Hero of Time wanted to save the Kingdom of Hyrule from Ganondorf and hence prevent his 7-year-long reign of terror. Sephiroth, on the other hand, aimed to fulfill the wish of his mother Jenova, and hence has appeared in the remake timeline to stop the one outcome that was destined for him, that of absolute failure. Nonetheless, if it was up to Sephiroth alone, it is quite possible that Cloud would have rejected to break the hold of the Whispers on all possible timelines, ending up with the same outcome. Instead, it was Aerith who persuaded the rest of Avalanche to challenge Destiny and change the bad future or downfall timeline that is the original Final Fantasy VII. When you think about it, this is exactly the same as what Princess Zelda does at the end of Ocarina of Time, where she, without asking of Link's opinion, breaks the flow of time by using the Ocarina of Time to send Link back with the Triforce of Courage. Both Aerith and Zelda decided to challenge the destiny outlined by fate to create a better future. But as we have learned from Zelda, there's still one contributing factor that can't be ignored, namely the main villains. Since Sephiroth, after achieving his goal of using Cloud and Aerith to break the grip that the Whispers held on the future and past, is now able to impact it himself. How it will unfold will just remain speculation until the sequel to the Final Fantasy VII Remake comes out in a few years' time. Though there might be a lesson to be learned by The Legend of Zelda, as despite believing that she had created a better future for herself and Link, that isn't exactly true in the child timeline. Since Ganondorf, upon being exposed by Link, who left Hyrule to avoid pulling the Master Sword and hand the Triforce of Power to Ganondorf, decided to instead invade the Kingdom of Hyrule with all his warriors, not very different from the outcome that Link was trying to prevent by warning the royal family. And a possible conflict to control Destiny after taking it away from the planet and the Whispers might occur in the next parts of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, Reimagination, sequel, or as Maximilian Dood so perfectly coined, Requel. A battle between Sephiroth, who wants to win this time, against Aerith and Cloud, who desire an even better outcome than the one found at the end of the original Final Fantasy VII. In other words, a struggle for one of the 2 ending outcomes that Aerith and Sephiroth will from now on be fighting for. But as we just saw from the child timeline of the Hero of Time and the Zelda franchise, the future may not end up the way you wish it to be. It is however understandable why Aerith, Cloud and Sephiroth made the decision to challenge Destiny. Sephiroth to get any other outcome than the current path where he was destined to lose, and though he knows that he might still lose in this new timeline, he at least will be able to fight to prevent that from happening. while Aerith has likely eyed an opportunity to perhaps save the planet from Sephiroth, but at the same time avoiding the reason why the Whispers are surrounding her in the first place. Even so, this wasn't the only reason, as she also wanted to break the destined flow of time in all other scenarios and timelines to maybe in one of them allow Zack in a parallel world to survive his last stand and be reunited with her in that specific timeline. The thing is though that the original timeline and game, that being Final Fantasy VII, remains intact. But as for the remake timeline and all the other parallel worlds, the future is now a blank page waiting to be written. And we know this is very controversial, but at the same time the timeline split of the Legend of Zelda Timeline was initially very controversial and remains so for some to this very day. Anyhow, if you enjoyed this video, then we would greatly appreciate if you could like it, subscribe to the Commonwealth Realm, press that notification bell for all notifications, and maybe even check out one of these two awesome videos.